It is truly my pleasure to welcome a very, very significant member of our Midwest American community who came to us from Israel, Consul General of Israel to the Midwest, Yinam Cohen. Yinam has been working in the foreign ministry for 15 years. He was a senior policy advisor to the foreign minister, a director at the United Nations Political Affairs Department. He'd been posted in Madrid, in Berlin, in Bogota. And very interestingly, he didn't start out in the foreign service. He has his MBA and started in the private sector as well. And so I'm assuming found a great calling to come and serve Medinat Yisrael and Klal Yisrael. So Consul General, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Rabbi Matanki. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. So let me just start with something very simple. So you've been in Chicago for several months. What have you learned about the Jewish community in Chicago?
Oh, wow. So yeah, we have been here for, I would say 3 months now. And it was an exceptional journey up until now, because I would say we're not, I'm first and foremost, of course, Israel's senior representative to the Midwest. But on a personal level and on a family level, I would say that we consider ourselves part of the Jewish community of Chicago, of Chicagoland, because we live outside Chicago in the suburbs. But we have met a beautiful community, a very committed community, a very Zionist community, a community that has embraced us from the first moment that we have been here. I had the pleasure to visiting already, I would say, a significant amount of synagogues and congregations. I have met leadership, I have met members of the community, and it's been a great experience. I have met a very well dedicated community to the state of Israel, to Medinat Israel, to the relations between the United States and Israel. So up until now, it's been a great journey.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. And you came at a historic moment in the history of the government in Israel as well, where Yair Lapid and Prime Minister Bennett formed a government that people never thought would last. When I was in Israel in June, people were just saying 30 days. Then they said maybe 60 days. And now it seems to still be staying together. Do you think this government is going to be able to continue with its approach for the long term, for the entire term of their service?
You know, that's a very good question. And this is a very unique government, first and foremost, because this is, as you said, this is the most diverse government in the history of Israel. Our prime minister is, by the way, for the first time in the history of Israel, he's, a Dati Leumi. He's coming from a right-wing party. Some of his government members are from the deep left. For the first time in the history of Israel, we have an Arab party that is member of the coalition and of the government. It's not just an Arab party. It's it is an Arab Muslim party. Some of the, I would say, colleagues in Arab states are from taking part in politics. They're illegal. And in Israel, in the Jewish states, they're part of the government. So I think this government brings new hope to Israeli citizens after maybe 2.5 years of political deadlock, which was, terrible, 3 circles of elections and no budget and so on and so forth. So it's a new government. They don't have an easy task because the differences are huge. But I think the decision that this prime minister and this government took is to concentrate on the 80% that unite us, and that is health, COVID, education, economy. And I think that in this sense, this government did a great job. They passed just last week, for the first time in 3 years, a state budget. So now we have a state budget and we can actually work. That's great news for me as a diplomat too. And once the budget has been approved by the Knesset, I think that guarantees for the government, at least for the midterm, if not to the long term, it's stability. So this is good news for Israel because we need stability. And I think it's also good news for the Israeli-US relations, because only once you have a stable government that is not worried about its, if it's going to make it for tomorrow or next week, then this government is actually able to concentrate on the most important issues. And one of them is definitely nurturing our, amazing strategic bond between Israel and the United States.
It was interesting. Last week, Nikki Haley was very critical of AIPAC in its attempts to remain bipartisan and said, it's enough already. You can't be bipartisan any longer. There are in the other party, the Democratic Party, those who are so far to the left that they're anti-Israel. As a diplomat, how are you maneuvering between those poles of American policies and American political tides that seem to move us back and forth, pro and against Israel?
Right. So Nikki Haley, I don't have to say that, is one of the greatest friends of Israel in the United States and one of the strongest supporters of the strong bond that we have between our countries. It's true. I mean, the United States, I think, has seen some growing polarization in the recent years. This is a phenomenon that is not unique to the United States. Israel has seen that too, and other countries. And our policy in regards with the relations with the United States has always been that, of course, it's a bipartisan system in the United States. So we need to be able to speak to both parties, of course. So we have great relations with the Republican Party, and we have great relations with the Democratic Party, which is in power now. True, there are some sectors in the Democratic Party who have gone towards a more progressive, super progressive edge, I would say, that is great by itself, but it also had some not always positive implications on their positions towards Israel. But let's just take the last vote in the House of Representatives on an Israeli issue that was held just a few weeks ago. It was on Iron Dome. There was, a massive support, bipartisan support in the budget for replenishing, Israel, Iron Dome, and that was, by the way, the policy of President Biden. So it was 420 House members who voted for this legislation. Only 9 of them voted against it. So the vast majority of Democrats, I assume, really support the security of Israel and really support the strong strategic alliance between Israel and the United States, which also has an important security pillar. True, there is a small minority who is against it. I'm not sure how many members of Congress actually wake up in the morning and ask themselves, what can I do today to undermine this bond between Israel and the United States? I think we're speaking about the numbers are very little, but we have to do whatever we can to reach out to all of them, because we want to make sure that this commitment to the relations is bipartisan, because the United States has a bipartisan system.
Okay. And in terms of Israel itself, as a diplomat, obviously you're not in one party or the next. But in Israel, you're also navigating some complicated times. You mentioned before the diversity of the coalition. I just recently read something on Arutz Sheva that was suggesting that the Arab Party, Ram, is actually also supporting Hamas. And it was very critical of them. Is this, how do you maneuver all of that?
Right, this is complicated. I mean, I'm not sure that a coalition party is supporting Hamas. I think that publication referred to some things that existed in the past and do not imply direct contact between this party and Hamas. Look, I mean, it's a party that is based to some extent on the Islamic Brotherhood, which is original movement in the Middle East. I think that the most amazing thing is that they took the strategic decision to join this government because they want to take care of the civil concerns of the Arab population in Israel, the Arab citizens in Israel. They're 20% of our population. This is great that finally we have some of their representatives taking part in the government. They want to take care of education. They want to take care of housing. They want to take care of health equity. And by the way, this government approved just a month ago 30 billion shekels budget for the Arab population, exactly to make sure that this is happening. To offer housing solutions, they need it. They definitely need it. To offer more education, to offer health equity, to make sure that more and more Arabs take part in the strong economic strongholds in the Israeli economy, such as the high-tech sector. We see growing numbers of Arab Israelis taking part in the high-tech sector. This is great. This is what we need. So I think this is, all in all, it's great news. If it's easy, no, it's not easy because it's unprecedented. If it's good, I think it's very good and very positive that they take part in the government, because this is the way to make sure that they, take the share that they deserve in the civic fabric of the Israeli society.
One of the big challenges we have is lovers of Zion and people who try to advocate as much as possible for Israel are some of the things that are happening today on the campuses. I was just in the University of Illinois on Monday, and right before I delivered a shiur at the Hillel, one of the students came up and talked about a letter writing campaign to the president of the University of Illinois, urging him to finally condemn anti-Semitism. And most of the anti-Semitism is veiled as anti-Israel. In this age of COVID, is this something you've been able to even get into the universities, deal with?
Oh yeah, this is something of great concern, Rabbi Matanki, and I have to tell you, I'm not sure it's veiled anymore, or to some extent, it's not veiled anymore. It's not only BDS. In some cases, it has been pure, old, ugly anti-Semitism, and this is something that is not only, first and foremost, it's for the American society to take care of, because this is something that happens in America, and I'm not sure that the American society wants or can tolerate any kind of anti-Semitism. It's not about Israel. It's about the Jewish state and about the Jews in many cases. And we have to be very much aware to that. And I, as the representative of the Jewish democratic state that Israel is, feel very much obliged and committed to take part in this campaign to fight anti-Semitism. Criticism about Israel is totally okay. This is part of our democratic life. It is okay to be critical of the American government, and it is okay to be critical of the Israeli government. But when it comes to undermining not Israeli policies, but Israel as such, Israel's existence, Israel's definition as the Jewish democratic state that we are, that is beyond political criticism. We have very clear definitions to what anti-Semitism is. There's an international body that is not Jewish, not Israeli. It's called IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It consists of many, many countries around the world. Many of them suffered anti-Semitism in the past. And IRA has a very clear definition to what anti-Semitism is. And part of it says that singling out Israel, that is, giving Israel a treatment or a policy that is unique to Israel, is a sort of anti-Semitism. And in some cases, this is what happens now in campuses, and not only in campuses. And for me, it's clear anti-Semitism, and we have to fight back very strongly. And I know that, again, it's not the job of Israel necessarily. It's not necessarily the job of the Jewish community. It is something I expect to see and hear every politician and every leader in the United States stand against anti-Semitism. Yeah.
So you're still able to get to campuses, and representatives of Israel are able to get to campuses nowadays?
I have been to campuses. My team has gone to campuses. We go to campuses in Illinois, but not only in Illinois, but we try to go all over the Midwest. It is big. It's not easy, but we do that. We've been to Michigan. We've been to Indiana. We go to Minnesota and Wisconsin. Yes. This is a very important role. It's not just about the campuses. It's about the generation who is who is being educated there. And in some cases, we need to make sure that liberal progressive values are great, but we need to make sure that there is no mixture, and some try to campaign for this mixture between progressive values, which are great as such, and anti-Israel, and not even anti-Israel, some in some cases, as I said, anti-Jewish messages. That should be, I mean, that should be the red line, and this is why we're in the campuses, because we want to make sure, again, I'm open to any criticism to Israel. That's great, that's fine. This is part of us. I mean, I have lots of criticism towards some of the policies of my government. This is normal.
But it's
But when
interesting.
it comes to undermine the existence of Israel, this is a red line, and this is why we go to the campuses. Yes.
When I was growing up, and I still believe this, we were always taught that we have to be supportive of Israel. And when we make Aliyah, we have a right to voice the criticisms of Israel. But as we're not being citizens, to be standing on the sidelines, and as Rav Lichtenstein once said, the sidelines of Jewish history, and to try to have a voice on the playing field was wrong. Would you think? Do you agree with that, or do you think American Jewry has a voice and has a right to a voice?
You know what? It's a very good question. It is a very complicated question. I want to give every American Jew the benefit of having an opinion, because I want every American Jew to be involved in what happens in Israel. And if I expect her or him to be involved, then I have to give them the benefit of being critical towards some aspects of Israeli policies. This is fine with me. I mean, criticism is okay, is legitimate. It's okay, it's fine. The thing is, again, one thing is to be critical towards some of Israel's policies. This is normal. The other thing is to be critical about the mere existence of Israel as a Jewish state. This is illegitimate and unacceptable for me.
Okay. If we can shift topics to one more, also
Sure.
complicated topic, and that's Iran.
Yeah.
The United States seems to be leaning once again to trying to enter into some kind of agreement with Iran. Politicians in Israel have said that they're in favor of an agreement. The agreement, though, has to be good. And the agreements, the way it looks, seem to be complicated right now for Israel. We've also heard strong statements that Israel will take action if they need to take action, whatever that means. And we hear about different things that have happened. Iran is, from the Israeli government, Iran is still, and as it was in the time of Prime Minister Netanyahu, the top item on the agenda in foreign relations, or has it moved?
The Iranian threat is certainly the #1 issue on the agenda. It's one thing, it's continuous breaching of previous agreements and, enriching much more and more uranium in higher levels, and, which might bring it very soon to the status of a threshold country. I mean, in nuclear terms. This is, I don't have to elaborate what are the consequences of Iran having a nuclear bomb or nuclear capabilities, military capabilities. Second thing is its malign activity in the region. Wherever Iran touched, whichever country Iran touched became a failed state. Look at Iraq, look at Lebanon, look at Syria, look at Yemen. So Iran is a major source for instability in the Middle East. It's not just an Israeli concern. This is a concern that is common to most of the Arab moderate countries in the region. I think there is, among other things, one of the reasons that brought Israel and many Arab states in the region closer in recent years. It's also a European and an American concern. So yes, Iran is a source for great concern in Israel. Now, we think that the JCPOA, the agreement that was signed with Iran, was not enough. It had some serious loopholes, and going back to this agreement as such would not necessarily, or in our opinion, would serve the goal of making sure that Iran does not fulfill its ambitions to become a military and nuclear power. Now, there is a very strong and intimate dialogue with the American administration. It's in the level of prime minister and president, in the level of national security advisors, in the level of foreign minister and secretary of state, and it's very intimate. And there might be cases that we will not definitely see eye to eye, which is okay, but we are very much committed to discuss it behind closed doors.
And is this something that you think American Jewry can still be helpful? We had seen when AIPAC had it as the #1 item on the agenda, it became divisive even within the American Jewish community, and it doesn't seem to have the same impact. Maybe people just have gotten used to bad things. Is this something?
It is a possibility, which is not a good one, but it is a possibility, right? I think the dialogue continues with the administration because it's the administration who runs the show on these issues. I feel that the major Jewish institutions have strong support in the security of Israel in this regards. So I feel quite confident in this respect.
You mentioned the Abraham Accords.
Right.
Can you predict what Arab country you think would be next to be able to join in?
This is a $1 million question.
Who are the top 5 choices?
I cannot elaborate much, and definitely I don't know everything for sure. But I would look to the definitely if there is the golden bullet is definitely Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is a crown jewel of the Arab world. I think there are more circumstances now that might allow some progress in the near future, maybe with Saudi Arabia, but it remains to be seen. Let me tell you the following. I was the senior policy advisor to Minister Gabi Ashkenazi, the previous foreign minister. One of the most exciting things that we did in this 15 months of his tenure was actually building the new relations and implementing the Abraham Accords with Morocco, with United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain. I was on the first official flight from Tel Aviv to Bahrain. That was very exciting. I have the boarding pass here at my office. This is for me something historical. So I know that great things could be done. I also know that besides these countries, we do have relations with other countries. And the major question is with whom and when we will see these relations come into the, daylight. I have the sense that we might be that we should be optimistic, and we might be able to see in the coming years some developments in this regard. At this point, I think I cannot elaborate more.
That's fair. So I'm going to shift one more time and ask a little bit about you, Consul General. Where did you grow up?
All right. So I grew up in Jerusalem. I'm actually the 3rd generation in Jerusalem. My grandparents arrived in the 1930s already, from Iraq, from Yemen, and from Egypt. They chose to build their homes in Jerusalem. They were Zionists. They came because they loved Zion. My parents were born in Jerusalem a year before the establishment of the State of Israel. My grandma, actually, my mother's mom, had to walk to Sharet Tzedek Hospital, if you know it, to walk by foot. It was a snow day in Israel, and it was during December 46. So she had to walk, and this is a strong memory that she always had. And I was born in Jerusalem. My older son Shachar was born in Jerusalem. Not unfortunately, but my other 2 girls were born abroad because of my career. So I grew up in Jerusalem. I went to Bnei Akiva. Shevet Amishav, if someone really follows the sequence of the Shvatim in Bnei Akiva. I studied in Himmelfarb High School in Jerusalem and served in the IDF. And then I studied at the Hebrew University, in something that has nothing to do with what I do today. It actually does have to do, because our business has a great deal of what we try to do here, but I studied computer science, and then I did a master's in business administration, MBA, at the Hebrew University. So this is my university, and I really much feel connected to Jerusalem. This is my home place, this is my heritage. And
so what brought you into the foreign service instead of high tech?
Right, so I was able to work in the private sector. I think my wife has never forgiven me for living the opportunities that the private sector offers, but I think what we do now has much more impact. I wanted to make an impact on the future of the Jewish state of Israel. I wanted to tell a story of Israel. I think that my family is a very representative, a great story of Israel. As I said, my grandparents came from Arab countries to Israel. The grandparents of my wife came from Europe, from Hungary, after the Holocaust survivors, and all of them built their houses in Israel. So they were just regular common people, but I think they're real heroes, because what we have today, we have achieved thanks to the resilience, and this is something we have to acknowledge. So I wanted to tell the story of Israel. I wanted to build bridges to the world, between Israel and the world. I wanted also, since I was a kid, I was very much interested in different cultures, and serving in Colombia, in Germany, in Spain, and now in the United States. It was first a great opportunity to get to know new languages and new cultures, but also really to build bridges between Israel and those countries. Each country is totally different, but when it comes to Israel, we basically have the same job. We want to see more connections. We know people to know more about Israel. We want to see more contacts between Israel and every country in the world. We want to see more business, more Israeli investments there, and foreign investments in Israel. And it is very exciting because you can actually see results, and you can actually see the impact. It's not always easy, it's not always positive, but I think the general trend of, I would say, Israel among the nations is very positive. We have many obstacles on the way, but if we look on the trend, where we were 20 years ago, where we were 50 years ago, and where we are today, and where we are expecting to be in 10 or 20 years, I think the overall trend is positive. I should say, Baruch Hashem, and we should keep on doing this job. We should keep on doing this job with many partners. And here in the United States, the Jewish community is a major partner. And yeah, I'm very optimistic.
No, I know you have made extraordinary inroads already into our community. I have received regards from you from more people than I think any other person that I know, because you've been at so many places and interacting with them. And that's to your great credit.
That's what I try to do.
And it is a pleasure to be able to spend this time with you. I guess one last thing, if you were giving advice to an American Jewish who is Chicagoan about Israel, what's the most important thing they can do?
Get to know Israel. You can live in Chicago or live in Israel. It's definitely a matter of personal choice, but you have to get to know Israel. Travel to Israel, get to know Israel, get to know Israelis. Once you know Israel, once you go to Israel, you could be critical or not, that it's not important, but it's important to feel connected. And if you feel connected, then your children will probably feel connected to Israel. And this is something that we have to guarantee. Midor ledor, we have to guarantee this continuous connection between Israel and the Jewish communities around the world, and especially in the United States.
I thank you very much for your time, Consul General.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for that.
And I look forward to speaking with you more. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for your time.
For sure. You too. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.